10. Texting and walking. What likely started out as an ordinary day for one New Jersey woman in 2017 ended in disaster. The 67-year-old was walking down the sidewalk in Plainfield while engrossed in her phone. While passing by a window business, she tripped and fell into an open sidewalk access door. The 6-foot plunge left her seriously injured, while a growing crowd of curious spectators gathered around. Firefighters got the ailing senior citizen out of the hole and rushed her to the hospital. Based on surveillance footage of the incident, it appears as though the woman was texting right before she put herself in harm's way by not watching where she was going. The access door was open that day because workers were repairing gas lines in the area, and she might have noticed this if she'd paid just a little more attention to her surroundings. With the way technology's taken over our lives, this could have probably happened to anyone. It's probably even fair to say that a lot of people have sheer luck to thank for the fact that they've never gotten hurt due to cell phone distraction. 9. Lauren K. Scott. 23-year-old Lauren K. Scott and her then-boyfriend, Robert Anderson Jr., had just finished being intimate one day in 2017 when she started to pay more attention to her phone than her man. Anderson got upset because, as he would later tell police, Scott would not get off the phone. He asked her to leave his Pinellas Park, Florida home, but instead of complying, Scott allegedly let her emotions get the best of her and struck her boyfriend of 6 months in the face, leaving him with a cut and a swollen lip. Police were called to the residence during the early morning hours. They took Scott into custody on suspicion of a misdemeanor domestic battery charge and booked her into the county jail. As it turned out, Scott was actually married at the time of the arrest. After sorting her legal issues out in Florida, she went back to LA, where she'd been living with her husband before she got into trouble. Sadly, things didn't get better for her, and she passed away last year from a drug overdose. Scott's aunt told the New York Post that her niece had struggled with addiction throughout her life. She was reportedly trying really hard to get clean and had been to rehab numerous times when she tragically lost her years-long battle against her demons. 8. Gonzalo Lopez. Due to the nature of his past crimes, convicted murderer Gonzalo Lopez was classified as a high-risk inmate at the Texas prison where he was serving out a life sentence. He was considered so dangerous that when he was being transported to a medical appointment on the prison bus in May, he was put in hand and leg restraints and locked in a special cage to prevent him from harming anyone. Lopez still managed to somehow break free from his restraints and cut his way out of the cage with a sharp object while the other inmates on the bus distracted the driver and an officer who was riding along. He then attacked the driver, and a lengthy struggle ensued as the men fell out of the bus and continued to fight. At some point, Lopez got back on the bus while the driver and officer shot at him. They also shot the bus tires, and after driving it for just a mile, Lopez wrecked it. Still, he was somehow able to slip out of sight. He vanished into the wilderness and continued his escape on foot. Lopez was still on the run 3 weeks later when he murdered a 67-year-old grandfather and 4 of the man's grandchildren. He stole some guns and a pickup truck, but his life on the lam was brought to an end later that day. Police tracked the fugitive's whereabouts and set some spike strips to deflate the tires on the stolen truck. Even after Lopez drove over the spike strips, he continued trying to evade police. He drove through a field and began shooting at officers from behind the wheel when he lost control of the truck and crashed into a utility pole. Lopez continued to shoot at the police, leaving them with no choice but to return fire. He died in the shootout. The escape left a lot of people wondering how Lopez was able to bypass so many security measures and flee from 2 armed prison staff members. To prevent something like this from happening again, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice has imposed heightened standards for transporting prisoners. A minimum of 3 officers are now required to ride on prison buses, which will soon be upgraded with new surveillance equipment. Inmates are now being searched more thoroughly, and the most dangerous convicts will be transported separately from the rest of the prisoners. 7. Jeff Hardy. Former WWE wrestler Jeff Hardy has gotten into his fair share of trouble in recent years. He was convicted of 2 DUIs in North Carolina in 2018 and 2019, and also has had 2 DUIs under his belt in the state of Florida when he recently received another. After receiving a call in the middle of the night about an impaired driver, troopers from the Florida Highway Patrol caught up to Hardy, who was driving a Dodge Charger on Interstate 95. He was reportedly going way under the speed limit, weaving all over the road and hugging the shoulder. It was clear that the driver wasn't paying proper attention to the road and that his mind was somewhere else entirely. Law enforcement pulled the car over and determined that Hardy's license had been revoked, and the only way he could get it back was if he had an interlocking device installed on his vehicle. The Charger was a rental car. An arrest report described Hardy as unsteady on his feet, confused and in a stupor. It also said that he reeked of alcohol. Hardy allegedly admitted that he had been drinking earlier in the day. It couldn't have been too much earlier, because his blood alcohol level tested out at 0.294, around 3.5 times the legal limit. Former pro wrestler Bill DeMott knows Hardy personally, but he also lost a daughter to a repeat DUI offender and is an outspoken activist against drunk, impaired, and distracted driving. Speaking with local station WESH, he questioned how Hardy got his hands on a rental car, since a valid license is required, and he wondered who might have rented the car for him or let him use it. 6. Matthew Whiting. Police in Salem, Illinois, recently responded to a call about a domestic disturbance between two brothers. When they arrived, 23-year-old Matthew Whiting was reportedly in his bedroom with the door open. He was armed with a hatchet and allegedly threatened to harm the officers with it before brandishing a sword and saying that he was going to hurt himself. Whiting seemed to have no plans to cooperate with law enforcement, but he had apparently gotten hungry during the 2-hour-long standoff. When he asked for a Klondike bar and some strawberry milk, police saw it as a potential opportunity to divert his attention away from his weapons long enough to take him away. The plan worked. While Whiting focused on the food and drink, officers managed to get the hatchet and sword out of his reach. Reporters claim that the suspect resisted the officers, who had to tase him before they could get a pair of handcuffs on him. While Whiting's distraction foiled whatever plans he may have had to continue the standoff, it was for the benefit of everyone involved, including himself, that the officers figured out a way to safely end the ordeal. He was charged with resisting a police officer, misdemeanor domestic battery, and being a felon in possession of a weapon. He was taken to jail on a $23,000 bond. 5. Gary Shannon. 71-year-old Gary Shannon was crossing an intersection on foot recently in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, when a Jeep hit and killed him. Emergency responders pronounced him dead at the scene. The driver who fatally struck Shannon was identified as 28-year-old Georgia resident Tiandria Bigsby. She was taken to the hospital after the crash due to a panic attack, but was released after being evaluated. An investigation found that Shannon was on the hood of Bigsby's car for several yards before the vehicle came to a stop. He was thrown from the hood and onto the pavement below. Evidence suggests that Bigsby may have been speeding and reaching for her cell phone when she hit the senior citizen. Officials from the Murfreesboro Police Department Fatal Accident Crash Team charged her with vehicular homicide. She remains behind bars after having her bail set at $75,000 and is due to appear in court in late July. 4. Clyanna Lightbourne. The Albany City Criminal Court in New York State was forced to shut down on a moment's notice recently when hundreds of cockroaches were released into the building in the middle of a hearing. Exterminators spent the rest of the day getting rid of the pests so that the court could resume as soon as possible. At the time the bugs were dispersed, several defendants were undergoing their arraignments after being arrested at the state capitol during a renters' rights demonstration. Over 24 protesters showed up in support of the defendants, including Senate staffer Clyanna Lightbourne, who reportedly took her phone out and began recording videos and taking photos, despite knowing that it's against courthouse rules. She allegedly became increasingly disruptive, walking among the audience and talking in the middle of proceedings. An arrest report claims that when officers tried taking Lightbourne into custody, she had an outburst and resisted by saying that she didn't feel like leaving. She's also accused of refusing to put her hands behind her back to be cuffed. While officers struggled to get the woman to cooperate, the protesters released the cockroaches from plastic containers. Authorities allege that Lightbourne purposefully made a scene to distract the court from the demonstrators while they did this. She faced numerous charges, including criminal contempt, resisting arrest, obstruction of governmental administration, and felony tampering with evidence, which carries a prison term of up to 4 years if convicted. In addition to her newfound legal troubles, Lightbourne lost her job and the $80,000 salary that came with it. And while she may have managed to inconvenience the court for a day, things were back to business as usual by the next morning. 3. Joshua Burwell. 33-year-old Joshua Burwell was walking along California's Sunset Cliffs in San Diego back in 2015 when he walked right off a ledge and fell between 40 and 60 feet, 12 to 18 meters to his death. A handful of people climbed down to try saving him, including a teenage boy who heard the man's pain screams from his home nearby, but Burwell died at the scene. Witnesses said that prior to the fall, he'd been staring into a cell phone or camera while strolling around at the site. It was clear that he was distracted by whatever he was looking at. Lifeguards searched the area for the device but did not find it. This tragedy is a reminder of just how dangerous it can be for someone to not pay full attention to their surroundings in certain situations. In an interview with NBC7, San Diego lifeguard Bill Bender pointed out the dangers of distraction don't just apply to driving. He mentioned that it's especially important not to walk and use a device at the same time in areas that are potentially dangerous, like, a cliff. 2. Oscar Otero Aguilar. In 2014, 21-year-old Oscar Otero Aguilar borrowed a gun from an acquaintance and began playing with it and waving it around while drinking at his home in Mexico City. Assuming the .45 caliber pistol wasn't loaded, he pointed it at his head and pulled the trigger while trying to take a selfie with his cell phone. It planned to post the photo on Facebook, where he was known for frequently posting images of himself with women and motorcycles. Aguilar had failed to check and make sure there was no ammunition in the gun and accidentally shot himself in the head. The young man's neighbor, Manfredo Paez, told the California-based news station Caro that he heard a blast followed by agonized screams. He immediately called for help, and Aguilar was still alive when emergency responders arrived. His injuries were catastrophic, and he died on the way to the hospital. Sadly, it seems as though the young man was too focused on his desire to show off on social media to realize that he was recklessly putting his own life in danger. 1. Triple tragedy. 3 teen girls were taking selfies together along a railroad track in Utah back in 2011 when they were fatally struck by a train. The trio apparently had no idea that a Union Pacific locomotive was approaching them from behind, and while the crew had tried honking the horn and screaming at the girls to move, even they knew that there was no stopping what was about to happen. Conductor John Anderson recalled the traumatic experience in an interview with Union Pacific's Inside Track magazine. He said that the girls were in their own little world and that he and his fellow crew members watched in horror as the train got closer to them. Its operators knew that there was no possible way to stop the train on a dime the way that they would have needed to avoid hitting the teens. By the time the crew managed to bring the vehicle to a stop, it had run them over. Anderson and his co-workers rushed to the scene, where it was clear that 2 of the girls were no longer alive. One of them had initially survived, but succumbed to her injuries in the hospital. The tragedy deeply impacted Anderson, who said that if he knew someone who was thinking about taking selfies near railroad tracks, he would encourage them not to. Unfortunately, he's all too aware of how devastating it is for everyone involved when something goes terribly wrong, including the person's loved ones and the train crews who are so limited in their ability to stop a locomotive from hitting someone on the tracks. Thanks for watching. Would you rather lose your entire wallet during a moment of distraction and have to replace everything in it, or have a jar of tomato sauce spill all over the wide seat of your new car? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.